I tell every new liaison the same thing on their first morning at HFY, before they have unpacked, before they have learned which corridor leads to the mess and which one leads nowhere. I tell them the line around human space was not drawn because of what humans do. It was drawn because of what they do not need to do. Most of them nod and forget it within the week. I have stopped expecting otherwise. I was the same, 41 years ago, standing where they stand now, certain that the warning was a formality left over from an older and more frightened generation. I served then as a junior liaison attached to the Mornell War College, the Vantresy Accord's oldest and proudest seat of strategic doctrine. 2 centuries of admirals and theorists had passed through its lecture halls. Its doctrine of calculated patience, strike only when the enemy has already spent itself, had won 3 border wars and ended 2 more before they began. We did not think of it as a belief. We thought of it as a fact, the way you think of gravity as a fact, something so settled it no longer required defending. HFY Border Command sat at the outer edge of the Accord's charted territory, close enough to the forbidden quadrant that on clear watch nights the duty officers could see, on the long-range plot, the soft red boundary line every cadet learns before they learn the names of their own home systems. Nobody at the college thought much about that line. It was a fixture, like the cold in the corridors. The line had held for longer than the Accord's written history, and a thing that has always held stops registering as a question. We measured ourselves instead against rivals we could see, the Threlican fleets, the Asa cartels, half a dozen lesser powers who challenged the Mornell doctrine openly and lost, year after year, exactly as the doctrine promised they would. That was the kind of contest we understood. That was the kind we had built 2 centuries of theory to win. That year the Accord had won, by lottery among 40 petitioning polities, the right to host a calculus exchange, an old diplomatic ritual, mostly ceremonial by then, in which a foreign envoy plays the lattice against the college's ranked masters. The lattice is not a weapon. It is older than most of our written law, a structured game of long sequences and patient denial, used for 1,000 years to let 2 sides measure each other's minds without measuring each other's fleets. No one truly expected the human polity to accept, or even to exist in any form we could correspond with. To us, they were closer to weather than to a neighbor, a forbidden quadrant at the edge of every chart, a place where ships went in and the record simply stopped continuing. A myth, useful mostly for frightening cadets. The delegate arrived alone, which the protocol officers found almost insulting, and which I now understand was never an insult at all. No escort fleet, no honor guard, no name given beyond a designation stitched into a gray traveling coat. Aperture 7. Quiet, unhurried, unarmed by any sensor reading we could take. It bowed to the marshal the correct depth, no more, no less, as if it had studied the gesture from a manual and found the manual sufficient. The first session was scheduled as a courtesy, a single match against a junior master, expected to last an afternoon and end the exchange on a pleasant, forgettable note. It lasted 6 days. Master Reln Avoth was a capable strategist, decorated twice, accustomed to losing perhaps once a decade. He lost without ever once being surprised by an individual move, only by the shape of the hole, which he did not see until it had already closed around him. He asked to be excused from the second round. No one pressed him on it. We assumed pride. The second master, senior theorist Veril Doan, was a harder case to dismiss, because she had spent her whole career arguing that the doctrine could be refined rather than merely defended, and she went into her match expecting to demonstrate exactly that. She lasted 11 days and resigned her chair the following week, quietly, citing health. I was on duty the morning she cleared her office. She did not look ill. She looked like someone who had been shown the bottom of something she had assumed had no bottom, and had not yet decided how to live with the knowledge. She left a single note pinned to her vacated chair, unsigned, which the college quietly removed before the next session began. I never learned what it said, and by then I had stopped believing I wanted to. The third lattice marshal, Orvin Caduth, 61 years undefeated, the college's living proof of its own doctrine, asked for, and received, 3 months. I was assigned to the observation gallery for the duration, which is the only reason I know what I am about to tell you, because almost nothing of it was ever entered into any record meant for wide circulation. Aperture 7 did not gloat and did not explain its reasoning, though it was asked politely more than once. It simply played slowly, with long pauses the masters first read as hesitation and later understood, too late, as something closer to mercy, time given for the opponent to see what was coming before it arrived. There was no cruelty in it. That was the part none of us could file anywhere. We had doctrine for cruelty, for aggression, for ambition, for fear. We had nothing written down for an opponent that simply declined to need any of those things, and won anyway. By the second month the gallery had stopped filling. The faculty who still came sat apart from one another, the way you sit apart from something you do not want to discuss in front of colleagues. Kadath grew thinner, not from any threat, nothing was ever threatened or raised in anger, but from the exhaustion of watching 61 years of certainty come apart one unhurried move at a time, in full view of everyone he had ever taught. On the 91st day, Kadath made the move that ended it. I watched him make it. I do not think he believed, even as his hand moved the marker, that it would fail. It failed. Aperture 7 studied the board for a long while longer, I think, than the position required, as though it were deciding not what to do next but whether the conversation needed to continue at all, and then it simply set its own pieces to rest, in the old gesture that ends a lattice match cleanly, without further play. Kadath asked it, in front of the gallery in front of me, why it had never once attacked when an opening presented itself, of which there had been several. I have turned the answer over for 41 years, and I have never found a way to make it smaller than it was. It said, you built your doctrine to survive an enemy who attacks. We do not attack. That is not mercy. It is simply unnecessary. It bowed the correct depth again, collected its traveling coat, and asked to be returned home. No escort came for it, and none had been requested. A single unarmed transport carried it back to the edge of the forbidden quadrant, where it crossed the line on the chart that every captain in the Accord had been taught since childhood not to cross, and the line did not so much as flicker. The Mornal War College retired the doctrine of calculated patience 11 months later, formally. In a closed session I was permitted to attend only because I had been in the gallery for all 91 days. There was no scandal in the retirement, no public accounting. The official language called it a modernization. Everyone in that room understood it was a surrender to an opponent who had never once needed to claim the field. In the years after, I watched the Accord do what every institution does with a wound it cannot display. It folded the episode into footnotes, taught in summary rather than detail, until most cadets now know only that the old doctrine was revised following an exchange. I let that stand. There is no kindness in handing a young officer the full weight of what I watched on the 91st day before they have learned to carry lesser weights first. But I have never let the file close entirely, and I have never stopped sitting the occasional new liaison down, as I am sitting you down now, to tell it whole. I still keep the closing position from that final match, copied by hand, in a drawer in my quarters at Kesevar. I have shown it to perhaps a dozen liaisons over the decades, and only one of them, so far as I know, understood immediately what she was looking at, not a victory, because nothing was ever won by force, and not a defeat, because nothing was ever lost by force either. Only a demonstration, offered once, without anger and without repetition, of exactly how far our doctrine reached and exactly where it stopped reaching. That is what I tell the new liaisons now, standing where I once stood. The line on the chart was never drawn to keep out an enemy who needed to attack us. It was drawn to keep us from finding out, the slow way, what waits on the other side when it does not need to. Kesevar's record of that exchange carries no defeat in its language. It carries a retirement, filed quietly, the way you retire anything that has meant something it no longer has the words to describe. The board still sits in my drawer, unmoved for 41 years, the way the line on the chart has stayed unmoved for far longer, and I have never once needed to ask either of them why.